Everybody, or good morning or good evening, because I know that there are some of you here from the US and some from other time zones as well. I don't know all of you, probably thank goodness for you. But I do know that you are scattered around the world. And first of all, I'd like to thank the IBPG and PIPS and LEEDS for inviting me today. And this is going to be great fun. I recommend that you hold on tooth and nail to the roller coaster that will be coming. You will notice that I am American, just as Josh, which means that I will not ever hold to a Cartesian speech if my life depended on it. You will be going all over the place. And today's journey will be taking us to Eurovision and the song contest. Now, I decided that we do not have enough joy in our lives lately. There's been quarantine, there's been riots, Black Lives Matter, which is, not to denigrate anything or the importance of any of this, but quite frankly, Eurovision was canceled and we had no outlet for joy in our lives. So today, I have decided, and I realize you can't see this completely and utterly, but we are in sequence. And I have decided that we are going with as much joy as we possibly can for the rest of the speech, just because I can't get out of actually having something to do with wearing sequins during the year. And feathers. Who knew feathers were so warm? Anyway, so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Eurovision Song Contest. And as an American, this is not something we know anything about. We had never heard of this. I got married in 2000. I moved here and we saw, let me think, Eurovision happens kind of springtime. So we saw our first Eurovision in the first year of my marriage in 2001. And can I just say that I had been here since December. I moved to Belgium to be with the man I loved. And in the first 4 months that I was here, there were 4 sunny days. 4, count them. And sunny, like I'm talking about today, which means light, but no actual sun. Okay. I moved here from Washington, D.C., a sunny, warm, southern city in the United States. I lived on the 5th floor of an apartment with a southern and western exposure. I had sun. I lived in Florida, basically, even though I was in Washington, D.C. And I had friends and I had a whole life. And I met my man and we were married very quickly and I moved here. And had 4 sunny days for for my first 4 months. So when Eurovision came on, I had the first flash of sunshine and sequins and kitsch and all the kitsch that I could possibly want, that my American heart could ever want, because obviously I wasn't able to watch Miss America anymore. We used to have these wonderful parties for Miss America in college and afterwards in grad school. We'd get together, we'd drink, we'd eat, and we'd, comment on the songs, the dances, we'd have sequins, we'd have feathers. It was great. And none of that was here. I didn't have the same friends. I didn't have, obviously, access to Miss America, nor do I even know when it happens anymore, quite frankly. And, who has any fun putting on sequins and feathers for yourself or just you and one other person? So to discover Eurovision was to open a door into the fact that, yes, there's a place for me in Europe. And I started feeling at home. So Eurovision for me is much more than just a kitschy song contest that comes up. I have been known to force friends to invite me to dinner in foreign cities just so I can watch it on their TV when I have a hotel that doesn't get the right channels. And I have to apologize to them publicly now. I am so sorry. And yes, I did sit there watching the TV and ignoring you over dinner. I do apologize, but this is what Eurovision, this is how strongly I feel about it. And obviously Europe felt this way about it too in the beginning, because when Eurovision was started, it was a way of bringing Europe together. Okay, at the time, all of these states were still nation states. I mean, they still are, but even more so. There was no freedom of movement yet. You still had to show passports at the border and things like that. And they had to find things that would help define the character of a continent that had been at war more than once, quite frankly. And so they were looking for things that would bring people together, and television was one of those big things, because television could be broadcast all over the continent. Not only that, but it could show things that everybody could understand without needing language. Queen Elizabeth's coronation, for example, happened after Europe was formed. And anybody could watch a coronation. They didn't have to understand English to be able to understand the pomp and circumstance taking place, right? They could watch football matches, international football matches, and root for the home team wherever they happened to be. Anything that easily traveled. So what happened was the European Broadcasting Union decided that besides these random events. Okay, football matches are not so random. They're programmed a year in advance and so on, but still, they're random. They wanted something that was more of a big event that would bring people together at the same time every year. And they decided to start the Eurovision Song Contest, which launched in 1956 with, I think, only about 8 countries. Not even the UK. They only came in 1957. At the time, there were 10 countries. So the UK and somebody else joined. I have no idea who the countries were. But first of all, you had to be a member of the European Broadcasting Union, which is why, and this has just been answered for me now, which is why Israel and Australia can be part of the Eurovision Song Contest, because they're members of the European Broadcasting Union. They don't have to actually physically be in Europe. They just have to be paying money to this association, which I think is pretty cool, quite frankly. So anyway, the EBU brought all of this together and launched it. And when the UK joined, they had their own regional, their own inventions that they brought to Eurovision, because they had had regional contests around the country as well. So they had regional voting. And the UK, funnily enough, I think might have been even at the origin of the scoreboard that we see at the end when everybody's voting. And also often nowadays, the UK gets nil point, or 0 points. Kind of sad that the people who might have brought in that invention are the ones who are usually at the end of that leaderboard. In any case, all of this started back in the 50s. And had the earnestness that you would expect from the 50s. People were serious about things, and they had some of their better artists come in. I mean, Volare, which is a song that everybody still knows, came in 3rd in 1958, right? And this is a song that people still know. And the United Kingdom, actually, in the very beginning, when they first joined, they kept coming in 2nd, not last, but 2nd. I think it might have been Norway that was last the most in the beginning of all of Eurovision. But in any case, the UK would come in 2nd. And in fact, the UK volunteered to host a couple of times when other countries were unable to do so. So at one point when France had just hosted in Cannes. I think the next year it was still, there were some issues in Algeria, which we are not going to talk about, but the UK offered to take on Eurovision for that year. And it was not a big deal because you could just have a theater, a large theater, maybe, but still a theater, and then a few cameras. And since the UK was the first to have color cameras, it made it a really big deal, right? So as you can see, even though Eurovision today is seen as being kitschy and shallow and, oh my God, what kind of things are happening up there and so on, at the same time, the outside world still touches on it. So for example, when France couldn't host it a second time at that time because of the war with Algeria and the unpleasantness, if you wish to call it that. And the UK volunteered to host. And at that time, it was 1960, there were 14 countries. And, at another time, after the Black September massacre and the Olympics, the Munich Olympics and so on, Luxembourg had only just hosted Eurovision and did not wish to host it a second time when they won again. And so the UK took it on because they were very worried about terrorist attacks. And quite frankly, when Ireland won, and this was back during the time of the Troubles, when Ireland won, the UK had to do something, to show that they wanted, that their neighbor across the water and over the border was not being looked down on. And so they tried to find singers from Northern Ireland, and they offered their color cameras to Ireland. So you can see that even though Eurovision has been seen as being this kind of shallow, kitschy thing, at the same time, there's a seriousness to it. There's a real seriousness to it, where outside events affect it, and then within, the whole political thing is affecting it as well. When England went to Ireland at one point, not the first time, but later, also during the Troubles, the singers were surrounded by security services. And the singers didn't actually realize at the time that they were targets for the IRA. They were thinking, oh gosh, we're just like the Queen. We get to have our outriders and our motorcycles and so on. So it's, on the one hand, there's this lightheartedness, but on the other hand, there was a real threat that people might, die. And in fact, I was watching recently, as one does, I was watching this fantastic hour-and-a-half long Eurovision at 60 documentary, which I really recommend anybody who wants to know more about Eurovision from the UK point of view, watch. And this gave all of this history, and it was wonderful because you got to hear the singers and you got to hear the songs, but you heard about how all of this was affected by outside events. And I'm wondering now what will happen this year. Well, this year we already know it was affected by outside events, and it did not get held the same way at all. And in fact, I watched the UK version of Eurovision, which was showing some of the songs and talking about them, but there wasn't really, it wasn't the same thing without the scoreboard and so on. But every year it gets affected. Now, I would like to make a point for a couple of things to go on with Eurovision. Now, one of them is that besides the political side, I think that it's become a home of kitsch for a couple of reasons. One of them is, for example, the UK is really well known for its fantastic music, right? I mean, they've got The Who, the Rolling Stones, I mean, people who were there long before. But did any of these people ever take part in Eurovision? No, because they saw it as beneath them, or because they thought, how would it look if I failed? Right? If I didn't win the crown, this would look really bad for me. For the Rolling Stones, I mean, please. But in any case, how could the Rolling Stones ever look bad? But anyway, so, the best artists never went for it from the UK. And therefore, others also saw this as being something like the kiss of death. I mean, if you win a Eurovision song, do you go on to fame and fortune? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. A lot of people win it. They're a big news for a minute and a half, and then they disappear out of the firmament. And when big stars do try and come in, they're so scared of failing that they do fail. They don't give it their all. And so therefore, people have started, instead of having these amazingly fantastic songs, and when one surprisingly shows up on the show, it never wins, which is really sad, because I still remember this one Hungarian song that was absolutely stunning, and it didn't win that year. But anyway, so sorry about that. So what happens is they're too scared and their song fails, or they fail, or they do a bad job, or there's political voting because people are talking about block voting. And that'll be my second proposal. But in any case, so this first one, so I would like people to start taking it more seriously, to stop going for gimmicks and only gimmicks because they think the gimmicks are what's going to win them the prize. I mean, who remembers 2006 in Finland with the monster masks? Oh my God, right? Yes, of course, we all do, any of us who watched it then. And that they won because of a gimmick. Not so much because their song was so fantastic or they sang so beautifully, but they had these weird masks, you know? And then I think it might've been Norway that won the year afterwards with this, you know, really light kind of cute tune with a violin and so on. And then like a couple of years later, or a few years later, actually, we had the Ukraine song that won. You know, that was the big, you know, it was almost considered political, though, you know, yes and no, depending on what camp you were in. And the problem with these gimmicks is that everybody then tries to copy those gimmicks afterwards, and they try and do the same thing next year. So I can't remember how many times, I can't count how many times since 2001, the winning song has been echoed in somebody else's song the next year, you know, where it's practically a copy of the same song because they think, oh, well, they won last year, I get to win this year, which is so not the case, and appropriately not the case. But it also means that more and more people are looking for more and more gimmicks. You remember the Russians with the ice skating, and then the Russians with the grandmas. You don't remember the ice skating. You have to remember the ice skating. That's when Russia won, right? And everything got to go to Russia. And then there were the little grandmas, the babushki. I wish they had won, I have to admit. And despite, you know, any political views you might have on Russia, the babushki ruled that year, I have to say. Anyway, so that's the first proposal. Now, the second proposal is this whole block voting thing that everybody talks about. It isn't so much block voting. It isn't like, oh, I have to vote for this country's song because this country is my political, you know, partner, and I have to vote against or not vote for this country because they're my political rival. I think it's much more that if a country is neighboring another country, these songs aren't unveiled at Eurovision. They're played a lot beforehand, and people just happen to vote for the songs that they are most familiar with. So of course, the French, who can't vote for their own song, are going to vote for a song either in French or from one of their neighboring countries because they've heard it on the radio a million times, right? Or Macedonia will vote for somebody, you know, for a song from somebody right next door because they've heard the song a million times. And so I don't think so much that it's block voting. I think it's much more voting for what's familiar. The problem with that is that the UK doesn't have any concentrated campaigns to get their songs out to the other countries because they have this attitude that English is the global language. Hey, it's not just interpreters, is it? Eurovision suffers from globish thinking too. And so because of that, there's no concentrated marketing campaign. And so their songs are not played absolutely everywhere. And because they don't put out the best songs anyway, nobody wants to play these songs absolutely everywhere. So it never becomes the familiar song that everybody's voting for. Beyond that, the Anglophones, the UK people, and you know, I am one of these Anglophones, we watch the BBC, partially because it's in English, and partially because first Terry Wogan and now Graham Norton have the best commentary on the songs. You know, they don't, well, Terry Wogan was a bit acerbic, but Graham Norton has a more gentle humor. Though I still remember him commenting on the Norwegian song that won one year. And he says, you know, it's really catchy the first 50 times. Now you just want to slap the guy. I still remember that comment. But in any case, we like that. And so we watch Graham Norton, whatever country we happen to be in, as long as we can get the BBC, right? So I may be in Italy, I may be in France, I may be in Belgium, I may be wherever, and I'm watching it on the BBC. And what does Eurovision say every single time? Do not vote for your own country's song. You cannot vote for the UK song in the UK. But they're not telling you, if you're outside the UK, here's the number in France to dial. Here's the number in Luxembourg to dial. Here's the number in Germany to dial. Please dial in. We'd like to have some votes. Not once have they ever thought of doing that on the BBC. And I think that they're missing a real trick here. I realize that that's a little marketing there for the UK that I'm giving for free. Also a little bit of a teaser for my Know Your Worth classes, if you ever want to come. Oh my God, they say, oh my God, can she do this? But yes, I just have. And I would like to just check and see with my moderator how much time I have left, because we can keep going. MJ, I'm looking at you. I should toggle time. Okay. I do apologize for the roller coaster that you've been following me on for the last several minutes. But I have to admit that this made me really happy to prepare for this particular speech, to be able to talk about something that gives me so much joy and so much fun, and to be able to wear my sequins and feathers for a change this year when I thought that I'd have no opportunity to do so because Eurovision was canceled. So thank you so much for the invitation and for all of these wonderful opportunities.